Good evening and happy Black History Month. Yes, we made it. So my name is Larisha Franks, and I'm here to welcome you to the third installment of Collective Conversations with featuring the one and only Miss Fredrika Newton. This is our first gathering of 2025, and I don't think I need to stress this, that the first few weeks have been quite tumultuous, right? Our country is just going through so much change, and this city is especially seen its share of devastation. And so just want to say that we continue to lift those in the Altadena and Pacific Palisades area up in prayer. And that, just to let you all know that the Black Equity Collective has partnered with the California Black Freedom Fund and the California Community Foundation to support organizations that have been on the ground, helping those that have been affected by the fires with their immediate but also their long-term needs. And so just want to share that. And if you would like to support those efforts, please consider making a donation to the California Black LA Relief and Recovery Fund. Okay? So in 2025, because of everything that's been going on, the word for the year for the Black Equity Collective is joy. We're choosing to revel in joy in all ways, despite everything that's going on, because we know we need moments like this to get through and face our challenges head on. So with that in mind, I want us to give a very joyful Black Equity Collective welcome to our founder and chief architect and host for this evening, Kaci Patterson.
Do I take this one? Oh. They tell me y'all can hear me. You can hear me? Okay, very good. Did they just play Not Like Us? Is that my walking music? Okay. Just checking. Good evening, everyone. Thank you all so much for being here. Welcome to Collective Conversations. I am your host, Kaci Patterson. For those of you who don't know me, I'm the founder and chief architect of Social Good Solutions. We are a Black woman-owned and majority-operated consulting firm working at the intersections of philanthropy, community, and racial justice. Since our founding in 2014, we have marshaled over $62 million to Black-led organizations in California. Thank you for clapping for that. I am also the founder and chief architect of the Black Equity Collective, the nonprofit organization that the firm founded. Our mission is to join funders and communities together in strengthening the long-term sustainability of Black-led and Black empowering organizations working on the front lines of social change. We have a network of 54 Black-led organizations, soon growing to 80 Black-led organizations, and our work is rooted in a vision of Black permanency. That is to say that as a people, we deserve to be here, that our humanity deserves to be dignified, that our contributions deserve to be appropriately credited, that our history deserves to be preserved, our stories told, our economic and political power respected, our creativity and ingenuity celebrated, and let's not get it twisted, our culture and our influence revered, because nobody does consciousness and cool quite like Black people. Y'all know. We gather here tonight as an act of self-determination to dream out loud about Black possibilities. And we do so fully aware of the anti-Blackness that envelops our country, and we do so unapologetically because as a people, we have never been silenced. We have always found a way to use our collective voice and our collective power to make America live up to its own hype: liberty and justice for all. And we gather here tonight because we are still our ancestors' wildest dreams come true. And it is now our turn in our generation to animate and activate those dreams for ourselves and for our generations to come, because we know that one day we too will be ancestors. And I can think of no better way to kick off our 2025 Fireside Chat Series Collective Conversations celebrating Black History Month by doing the very thing that they don't want us to do, which is to tell our stories in our way. There is no more fitting way to defy those seeking to dismantle Black progress and to accelerate Black erasure by saying we are here and we are going to tell our stories, we are going to gather, and we are going to be joyful. Because y'all know we have a way of saying, I wish somebody would tell me what we not gonna do. I wish somebody would try us, because that's when we really gotta pop out and show them. Y'all know how we do. So tonight, I am so honored to welcome our guest. For the teachers in the room, you would call her a primary source, someone who lived the history that she is telling tonight, someone who made history herself. She is someone who was an eyewitness to some of the most intimate parts of one of the most revolutionary movements in American history. She is a daughter, she's a wife, a mother, an educator, a historian, a creator, a curator, a nonprofit founder, and I'll give her one more, something that someone once called me, a revolutionary debutante. Before she married the co-founder of the Black Panther Party for Self-Defense, Dr. Huey P. Newton, our guest tonight was an educator working in the Panther Party at the grassroots level. And 6 years after her husband was killed, she organized and opened up an organization in his name. She founded the Dr. Huey P. Newton Foundation in Oakland, California. And as you'll see from this clip that we're about to watch, the Panther Party was really one of the vanguards in establishing what we now call the social safety net in America.
You can read the platform of the program. It's a basic program, and it simply says exactly what Black people have been crying for 400 years.
Huey P. Newton and Bobby Seals started the Black Panther Party in Oakland in October of 1966, creating over 60 survival programs to help the community. Chapters were then created all over the United States and across the globe.
Well, it was many sides to Tupac. He was raised by the Black Panthers.
From Super Bowl halftime performances to movies, the party has been part of the American consciousness for over 50 years. One of the essential programs was the Free Breakfast Program, which became the blueprint for the free breakfast program that the federal government runs today. Party members also distributed thousands of meals per week and set up food distribution sites to feed those in need. Actually, the party created medical clinics nationwide and provided medical care free of charge to those seeking medical attention. They focused on sickle cell anemia, which disproportionately affected African Americans. They also created the Oakland Community School in East Oakland. The students were taught by party members, and the curriculum focused on culturally relevant education, replacing the public school system's European framework, perceptions, and biased curriculum. The school was created to educate, heal, protect, and liberate young Black students.
And it's the people that will cause the revolution, and it's the people that will cause the change in the country. The Black Panther Party is simply the vanguard of the revolution, and we plan to teach the people the strategy and the necessary tools to liberate themselves.
This is the Black history that we need to learn and that we need to discuss and talk about. Please stand up on your feet and join me in giving a Black History, Black Collective warm welcome to Mrs. Fredrika Newton.
So my family here. Thank you so much.
So good to have you here. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you.
So you and I met in August, and we connected.
Let me get comfortable.
Yeah, get comfortable.
Okay.
Yeah, this is a nice couch. Get comfortable.
It is really nice.
These beautiful pillows. So you and I connected at an event where I was interviewing Dr. Kimberly Crenshaw. For those who don't know who Dr. Crenshaw is, all the talk that you hear in the news about critical race theory and intersectionality, she is the pioneer of that work. So I was interviewing Dr. Kimberly Crenshaw, and we were talking about something that really connected with you on a personal level that we're going to talk a little bit about tonight.
Okay.
But we connected as really nonprofit founders. Mm-hmm. And then later we learned that we have another connection that I'll talk about later as well. Yeah. Yeah. Surprise.
My family is here. Can you stand up, fam? I didn't know.
Yeah. So we'll talk about that in a little bit too. So let's get into it because I have a lot of questions. I have a lot of ground that I want to cover with you tonight. I'm so pleased and privileged to have you here.
Thank you for having me.
So every activist has a seed that gets planted in them, usually at a very young age. So I'm curious if you could tell us about what do you remember about the seeds of activism being planted in your own childhood?
What don't I remember? It's like I like to say that we learn to march before we learn to walk, because my mother was an activist and my father was. They actually met at I think it was a Socialist Workers' Party event in San Diego, as a matter of fact. And so my mother spent her whole life fighting against racism, redlining in the real estate industry. My mother was a Jewish woman and used to pose as the buyer for properties so that Black families could buy in areas where they wouldn't be able to buy. So I remember getting pulled out of school in the 6th grade to go on a march for fair housing. And the teacher was upset that we got pulled out. So we also lived on a street that was like the hotbed of activism in Berkeley. And the climate in Berkeley was free speech movement at Cal and anti-war demonstrations. And so my house was always filled with activism. We would licking stamps for local electeds. It was almost like the religion of my mother, politics at the time. So I didn't know anything else but politics and activism. All her friends, I didn't know anybody that wasn't an activist. I just thought
that's just what you do.
That's just what you do.
So you really had no choice.
No, and it wasn't for lack of trying either.
Tell me a little bit more about your mother's involvement with the Panther Party. How did she break through the barrier at that time? There was a lot of distrust with white America and really the sort of Black revolutionary movement. So how did she break through the barriers of distrust, and how did you sort of think about your own mother's role in the party?
You know, it's really interesting because I didn't know that she was working with the party. And like many kids, they do exactly what their parents, they kind of fight against what their parents do. Like, I was more interested in fashion and going to parties than I was in activism at the time. But I went away to school. I went away to, they were doing heavy recruitment of black students in Berkeley and Oakland, up in Oregon. But let me back up a little bit. My next door neighbors were activists. Tom Hayden, who was part of the Chicago 7, and his wife lived next door. And one day they said, do you want to go see Huey Newton? There's a Huey Newton rally. He's being released from prison today. And I said, oh, sure, I'll go. And I was just blown away at the crowd. It was so diverse. It was diverse in terms of ethnicity and race and age. And I remember seeing Huey, and I don't know if you guys remember that photo. It's kind of a famous photo of him on top of a Volkswagen. It wasn't because he was trying to flex. So he was fine, but he was he had a sensitivity to heat. And so he was taking off his shirt, and I was, really close as this is right here, and I thought, I was so captivated by the whole scene and the energy in the crowd, and everybody was so it was just electric. And
how old were you at the time?
I was 18.
Okay.
And so I went back home, and then I went away to school. So I didn't know that my mother was working with the party. I knew that she'd always, activism was just what she did. But when I came home, my mother said, Huey Newton is coming over for lunch. And this was maybe 6 months later at Christmas break. So he came over for lunch, and that's when I met him. So my mother earned their trust through the work that she had been doing. My mother took a lot of hits for the work that she did. She was a woman-owned firm. She stood on business, and people used to say that her real estate office was more like a movement than an office, than a real estate firm. So that's how I met him.
What were those early conversations like? What do you remember about that lunch? What do you remember about his persona?
We lived in a small house, but it was packed. And I remember Huey was sitting at the dining room table, and there were young people, students and activists and intellectuals. I don't know. They were asking all these heavy questions, and people were sitting all on the floor, and he was nervous. So I remember asking him, it was nothing heavy. It was, I just was really curious who this guy was, because I'd seen this iconic photo of him in this wicker chair, but who is this guy? He seems nervous, he looks a little shy. And so I remember asking him, and I was standing by the door, and he was sitting at the table, and I asked him, so what was it like in prison? And he put his fork down, and he took his time, and then he finally looked up, and he answered, it was very lonely there. And there was something in that moment that just kind of took my breath away, that he would take such time with this question. It was really a simple question from this young girl, and give it so much consideration and be so vulnerable.
I was going to say it was a moment of vulnerability.
It was a total moment of vulnerability for him to say.
What did your mother say about him? How did you hear her talk about him?
That's really interesting. My mother really loved Huey. And that night when I went to his house, and I was a pretty protected kid, so it was out of character for her to kind of give the okay for me to go to I got a call saying Huey wanted to see me. And I wanted to see him. And so I just remember her, this was in the beginning, because things changed after I joined the party, that he was she really liked him. She loved him like a son. She respected him, of course, and she was instrumental in finding him the place where he had to move to be protected. And so she felt protective of Huey.
Yeah, that meant something.
Yeah. Yes. So things didn't change. Her feelings towards Huey didn't change, but she was really had a hard time with me being in the party because of how, well, it wasn't very safe. You know, so many members of our organization were killed. So.
That is so interesting to me because there's a consciousness that mothers have about their children's own safety, right?
Yeah.
Almost a consciousness, it sounds like she even suspended for herself. You know, she was okay with working alongside the party, but for her own daughter, you know, to be involved, that felt like maybe a step too far. Like, you know, we get into mama bear mode, you know, a little bit. So tell me about your early days working in the party. I heard you say in another interview that you talked about how you got involved as an educator. So tell me about your involvement with the party.
Absolutely, I will. I want to say this before I forget. My dad wasn't happy. You know, my dad, I don't think ever forgave my mother for making this introduction because it put me in harm's way. And so when I was working on the picket line, they came and tried to get me to come home. This is
go down to the fashion
right. Go do something, but come home. But so I didn't go back to school. I didn't go back to Willamette. It was a mutual decision. I was not doing well there. We lived in a area that was really racist. I believe they were still having Klan meetings at the time. Was going to Willamette University in Salem, Oregon. And so my grades had plummeted. 3 of my friends had gotten killed in a car accident, and there were only 35 of us on the campus. And I started going to Merritt College.
Okay.
And at Merritt College, we were fighting to keep the college there in the flatlands. They were trying to move, which they successfully did, move the college up in the hills where black people couldn't go because black people didn't live in the hills. And Merritt College was also a hotbed of activism. That's where the Black Panther Party was formed through Huey and Bobby as students there. So I didn't know that the leader of our movement there was a Panther, Doug Miranda from Boston. I didn't realize that. At the same time, I was working at a co-op grocery store, and these kids were coming in, and they were selling Black Panther Party newspapers and had these little cans that said Free Breakfast for Children program. So I was liberating the food from the co-op and feeding these kids. I used to fill the little coffee bar, and I'd feed them. So I began to fall in love with the kids, and here I was being radicalized by as a student, and
didn't even know it.
No, come to find out, I told Huey, these kids come down, they sell in the paper, those are my kids, they go to my school. And then that's Doug Miranda, he's a party member. So that's how I started to go down to the school to volunteer and started going there full time. Started work with the party.
I also heard you talk a little bit about some of the imposter syndrome that you had when you first start to get involved with the party. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that. What was the source of your imposter syndrome and how did you overcome it?
How did I overcome it? I mean, I think when I was hearing you, I mean, I'm gonna be honest, when I was hearing you in that introduction, I was thinking, yeesh, am I gonna come out there? That's a lot. Is that really me?
It's really you.
So I think I can still suffer from not feeling enough in that way. I think it had to do with the fact that my mother was white, and as much of an activist as she was, I never felt, I didn't feel like I fit in either world. I sure didn't fit in her world, and I didn't fit in my world, and so I just didn't feel Black enough in that organization. Looking looking from the outside, but I never felt that way with Huey. And so when I came into the party and I saw that they had alliances and coalitions with other groups and white folks that had this common fight against oppression, and Latinos and Asians and gay and lesbian, and I began to feel like that I did belong as much as anybody else did. But it's been a lifelong struggle.
Mm-hmm. Because you could see the diversity, and you saw your own diversity showing up in the alliances, is what I'm hearing you say.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I should have said that. I could see the diversity. I could see the alliance.
Feel free to use it.
All right, I will. I'll take your cards when you leave.
No, I'm so fascinated by this because I think as folks who work in the nonprofit sector, you know, we often get in the work for very similar reasons. It's like you're just trying to solve a problem,
right?
You know, and all of a sudden you find yourself in this sector, and you know, there's all this professionalism that has to happen, and then this imposter syndrome starts to set in. But really, your motivation to even begin the work was so pure. You know, even being able to be part of something that's bigger than you, you know, like you actually start to see yourself as part of a solution, you know, and then when you start to understand the gravity of what you're in, that is when I feel like the imposter syndrome starts to set in, because you feel like this work is bigger than you. Little old me, you know, you feel like this work is bigger than you. So I'm hearing you say it helped to actually see others who represented you or who you felt a sense of camaraderie with, that, you know, they were just everyday folk the way you were everyday folk.
I think seeing people like Erica Huggins in particular, when Erica was released from prison and came to California, I really related to her because she was quiet. I think I was quiet. She wrote poetry. She didn't kind of fit the mold. And it allowed me to feel okay with who I was. Quieter voices, quieter women in the party. It helped me to feel okay with who I was, because there were so many dynamic women in the party and men.
But everybody has their role.
Everybody has their role.
Everybody has a place. Yeah. There's room in the movement for everybody.
Everybody.
That's the message. So the Black Panther Party for Self-Defense, its official name, was founded by Dr. Newton and Bobby Seale roughly about a year and a half, actually, after Malcolm X's murder. Mm-hmm. And I've heard the stories of the deep influences that Malcolm X had on your husband and Bobby Seale. And I'm wondering, what did he tell you about his motivations for organizing Black power through the Black Panther Party in the way that he did following the death of Malcolm X?
He was very impacted by Malcolm. As a matter of fact, when his widow, Dr. Betty Shabazz, came to the Bay Area, Huey organized a group, a cadre of Panthers to escort her from the San Francisco airport to her destination. He knew that that King's earlier mission wasn't working for him, and so he really related to Malcolm's spirit. And although he wasn't religious, he didn't have the religious or spiritual background or foundation in his organization that Malcolm did, it was kind of what he saw was to be the next step.
Say more. The next step of what?
The next step of organizing, the next step of impacting, the next step of making a change within the Black community, so that it wasn't just members of the organization that were going to be uplifted, but the community as a whole. It wasn't a spiritual movement. It was an organizational movement that would impact all Black and oppressed people.
Yeah. All power to the people.
All power to the people.
Yeah. Because what you're saying is really interesting. We talk about this in our movement space now, that there's this sort of charismatic leader, right? So that was sort of the movement of the civil rights movement, even with Malcolm X. It was,
Yes.
There was this charisma that really, of one leader that really drew people in. And it sounds like there was a different, they realized that there was a need for a different kind of vision, that it wasn't about elevating one or two leaders, but it was really about amassing power amongst everyday people. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about sort of the vision behind all power to the people.
I wanted to talk a little bit about the fact that when Huey went to prison, there were maybe 46 members. When Huey got out of prison 4 years later, there were 46 chapters in as many states. So he came out as a 28-year-old man with this huge responsibility that I felt that he seemed not overwhelmed with, but he felt very responsible for.
Was he okay with that responsibility?
No.
Okay, tell me why.
No.
Yeah. No, it's real. It's real because
It
a lot of
pained
leaders
him.
will say, like, this is, I don't want to say like I'm not worthy of the responsibility, but the weight of the responsibility
It
feels
weighed
very
on
heavy.
him.
Yeah.
He was still imprisoned when he came out of prison. He suffered. I mean, he suffered when little Bobby Hutton was murdered. He suffered. And I think when he died, he still felt the weight of that and the responsibility of that. Mind you, we had 32 members of the organization who were murdered by police. So it was a lot for him. He was the chief theoretician of the party, but Bobby was the spokesperson. Bobby could really reach the people and impact the people in a way that was harder for Huey. Huey was in his head, and Bobby, who was a trained comic, I think, and an actor, and he could reach the people in language that the people could understand. So there was a balance there in terms of leadership. Huey was really an introvert, so he was most comfortable around children, honestly. And writing.
In writing.
Yeah. And spouting theories that were above most of our heads.
Speaking of being in our heads a little bit, let's talk a little bit about this notion of Black radicalism. I'm always so intrigued by what people describe as Black radicalism, because if you look at the party's 10-point program, which I know we're going to put up on the screen here so folks can see, most of what you read here is really based on human dignity. It's based on constitutional and human rights. And I'm always so curious as to why these things are characterized as radical.
What's radical about feeding children who are hungry, going to school in the day? These are basic human needs. What's radical about full employment for our people? But these are basic needs that the government was not supplying for. So I guess they were radical at the time. When what was radical was the fact that the government, who had so much, was doing so little, and you had an organization full of teenagers, for the most part, who was doing so much with so little. That in itself was radical. I guess it was radical to
doing for the people what its own government wouldn't do.
Who was fully capable of doing. So I guess that's why. I mean, these were organizing tools, because if a kid can say, "Well, I don't understand how this group of teenagers can do so much. They were young adults, can do so much. Then why isn't the government doing this?" So then this was a way of organizing people. This organization was really based on love. We had an ideology, we had a foundation. The foundation was rooted in love. And if you come to Oakland or come to any community where the party was strong, people still talk about the party with love. Because just like I have family through you out in this and I can't go out of my door most days and not meet somebody who wasn't impacted by the party, by their cousin or their auntie. they were fed in the party or clothed. It happens every day. So the community loved the party because they were meeting these basic needs, which I guess was radical.
Yeah, I was going to say, so it's like the radicalism is almost as if it was a way to get the community and the people to focus on what was absent from their government.
Absolutely.
You know, what was present in their own community, you know, the people in their community, but what was absent in their government.
Yeah.
And I could imagine that being a very severe threat to the powers that be that was organizing a society really as a caste system, as we've heard Elizabeth Wilkerson talk about, like, you know, what it means to actually exist in a caste system. So this notion of Black radicalism always strikes me as, why is it that human rights and human dignity and love are radical in a society that claims to be about liberty and justice for all?
I don't have an answer to
That's
that.
the question. Yeah. That's the question. One of the many questions. So I want to really dig into points 6 and 10. What was some of the thinking around the details underneath these program plans to say, actually, Black men shouldn't be expected to serve in the military? Why was that so important?
Because during that time we had the Vietnam War. So you had Black men that were being put right in the front lines. They were the first to be killed. They were going into a country where people look like them. So why should they be colonizers in countries that were fighting the same oppression that they were? So, and they were being killed in disproportionate numbers. So the thought was, why should Black men be forced to go serve a government that wasn't serving them?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And to do the government's bidding of colonizing
Yes,
other people.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I remember my father-in-law who served in Vietnam. I remember he told me a story about a time where he was in a hole. You know, he died a couple of years ago, but he told a story about a time where he was in a hole and he was really afraid. And he talked about how he didn't know if there was a God, because why would God put him in a position to have to kill somebody else in order for him to live? And he really struggled with that. And he talked about being in this hole, and he came face to face with a Vietnamese soldier. And they looked at each other and they pointed their guns at each other. And he knew, this is it. It's either him or it's me. And he said that moment, that incident, is what made him believe that there was a God. Because what happened in that moment is that he looked in that man's eyes and that man looked in his eyes, and he said he thought to himself, if I back out, maybe he will too. And so he started to back out of the hole with his gun pointed at him, and so did the other soldier. And he knew that God was telling him, you both can live. So I'm struck by what you're saying, that there was injustice in asking Black men to go and kill and murder in the name of a government that had been doing to them as Black men what this country was trying to do around the world. That there's an injustice in asking people to become something, you know, that they are themselves opposed to.
And that was the thought behind it. That was the thought behind it. I don't think I've heard a story so powerful that illustrates that.
I've heard you talk a little bit about some of the practices that the party was able to dispel. Talk a little bit about some of the patterns that the party was able to break that really resulted in more shared power.
One big example of that is when Huey was in exile in Cuba, Elaine Brown took over the leadership of the party. So Elaine Brown became appointed by Huey. At one point in the party, 70% of the membership were women. At one point, the most of the Central Committee was comprised of women. So Huey, yes, of course, misogyny, we were part of the world, existed in the party, but I think that there was a real concerted effort to fight against that in the best way that we could. There was, I remember one time there was, they used to say that men could date out, well, we weren't doing much dating, but men could have relationships with women in the community, but the community couldn't, but the women couldn't have relationships in the community, because the thought was that women would get pulled out of the party and men would pull women into the party. Well, that was...
How'd that work out?
So we had a little hearing where that ideal got kind of called on the carpet, and Huey backed down and said, no, that's not fair. So I remember, actually, I'm going to tell you, most of the dynamic people that I knew in the party were women. Women were placed in leadership positions all throughout the party.
Okay, now let's talk about COINTELPRO. Let's talk about the role of COINTELPRO.
To kill, steal, and destroy.
Which is, by the way, what the Bible says is the
right.
devil's role.
That's why
to kill, steal, and destroy.
Yep.
But let's talk a little bit about it, and let's talk about, number one, explain to folks in the audience, what is it? What is COINTELPRO? And how was it used against the party?
COINTELPRO was the FBI's war against the party. Not just the party, but many individuals, even including my mother. So they were under constant surveillance. And what it looked like in the party was you didn't actually know if the person that you were sleeping with was an agent or was your husband, or both. Our phones were tapped, the apartment was tapped. We could see it through the Freedom of Information Act. I have my papers, and my mother was able to get her papers decades ago. So you can see intimate times when we're together, and it was being recorded. Mm-hmm. So he was under constant surveillance. We all were. We didn't know who was an agent, who wasn't.
It wasn't just the unity of Black people. It was a multiracial effort that was the biggest threat, to sort of the powers that be. And we lose sight of that, sometimes. And I really want us as a sort of new generation of movement leaders to really learn from and be a little bit more sophisticated about being able to recognize when some of those tactics are being used against us today.
Yeah, it's really hard when you're in the eye of the storm to see it.
So when you reflect on the party's successes and failures, what really stands out to you, and how are some of those lessons able to be gleaned today? How would you encourage us, to apply some of those lessons today?
I think the legacy of the party, although so much was decimated, is to show that this work can be done.
Community care.
Community care.
Yeah.
It can be done. It's not only care, but it's action. That you can do a lot with very little. And I think one of our, although, it's hard to take things out of context, because, what did we do wrong? We didn't rest. We never rested. We didn't have any kind of spiritual foundation, whatever that is. I wish that we'd had, it seems like a luxury, because we're 24/7 we were 24/7 doing this work. I talk about, you see a brother with a gun and a beret and looking menacing, but you don't see him up at 5 a.m. feeding children. But that's what he was doing at 5 a.m, and then all night he's guarding, because we lived collectively. So not just he, but the women too, we all did, had to guard to make sure that the police were not vamping on our place of where we lived. So it almost feels like a luxury to say, oh, we should have rested more. Oh, we should have been more spiritual. But I wish that that we had recognized that we did need rest.
Yeah, I'm actually really happy to hear you say that, because one of my observations is that one of the most effective tools of oppression is exhaustion. Because we're running around in circles and we don't have time, just trying to survive, that we don't have time to actually examine why it is we're running around in circles. Right. What are actually the systems that are creating the conditions? And when we take rest, I just got back from a sabbatical, talk about the privilege of rest, and one of the parts of my sabbatical that was most enriching, people say, oh, did you rest? Actually, not really, But what I did do is I had a time for discovery. I had time to actually discover new things and new modalities and new ways of thinking and being and integrating those things into my work, And so this idea of rest is longevity, rest as a radical strategy.
Yeah.
We definitely need more of that. So I'm glad to hear you actually say that was something you wish that you all did more of.
I wish that we had done more of that, and I'm trying to incorporate that in my current life.
Good luck as a nonprofit founder.
Yeah. I did sign up for an art class. Before this evening, I said, that's my rest. But yeah.
We know it well.
Yeah.
So eventually, the sort of two schools of thought emerged in the party that became sources of tension. And I raise this because this is not uncommon in the human condition. Things are going, and people eventually have different approaches and different strategies and different tactics, and sometimes they don't align. And you're at a decision point. And so I don't say it as a way to be pejorative, but really as a way to just recognize the human condition, that sometimes different schools of thought emerge, and you have to make decisions. So for some in the party, the choice was really about armed struggle. And I heard you say once that for others like Huey, it was reform, or it was survival pending revolution. When you look back, what wisdom, I'm not asking you to say who was right, armed struggle or,
right,
or Huey school of thought. What I'm asking you to espouse upon is really, what wisdom would you offer us in our current movements when we find ourselves faced with these choices, when there are sort of schools of thought that are emerging? I mean, we deal with this now in the movement. You're either an abolitionist or you're a reformist. And so some of these like purity tests, get put up before us, and it actually works to divide us instead of uniting us for a common purpose. So what wisdom would you offer us who are in the movement now when we're dealing with these sort of strategic choices, these strategic differences that might emerge as just a matter of our work?
I can tell you what Huey was faced with at that time and why he made the decision to go in the direction that he did. He felt that armed struggle was a defection from the community, that the community has to lead the movement. We were led by what the community wanted. We could not lead the community into something that they were not ready for. So then we were pretty much defected from the community in a couple of ways. So he felt that at that time to armed struggle was nothing but suicide. So I think that he had to listen to where the community is. And I think that's current as well. It's really the community leading the struggle, not the organization leading the community. We had defected from the community when we were in churches cursing. Had defected, even the black leather jackets and the berets. Huey stopped wearing those and we're wearing suits and go in the churches to organize and speaking like he had some sense. So You know, so you have to align yourself with where the community is at that time. We needed our basic needs met, and that's where the party was at that time, and that's when the party was most impactful.
Yeah, no, that's wisdom. And we talk about meeting people where they are, and that's essentially what you're describing, you know?
Yeah.
So I appreciate, you know, you reinforcing that wisdom here tonight. I want to get a little personal. You and Huey married in 1984.
Yes.
Did you feel at the time of your marriage that you were past some of the scariest parts of his perceived threats to white power in America? Or were you always scared for his safety?
I was always afraid for his safety. I got married very quickly. I hadn't seen him in a couple of years. And he called me up on a Monday, and Friday we were married. So I didn't give a lot of thought. My brother described it as a moth to a flame. I didn't give it much thought. I mean, he was the love of my life. And but when we went to Reno to get married, when we flew back into Oakland, the police were waiting for him. So it wasn't very long after we got married that the police raided our home. They tore it apart. They arrested him. You know, it never ended. So I was always afraid for his life. And then I became afraid for my own son's life, my own son's safety as a result of that. It's never left me. Not just his safety, my own. I kind of, now when are they going to tear this foundation apart or find some, so it's not something that's left me. It almost feels like an inevitability because I saw it with my own mother. Mm-hmm. I saw it with people who were close to me.
If you don't mind, tell us a little bit about Huey the man. What made him laugh? What was his favorite dessert? Did he like Michael Jackson or Prince?
Prince.
Hey, my kind of guy. Hey.
Prince, definitely. Yeah, he
Tell us
loved
about
Prince.
him as the man.
Okay. He was easy. I mean, he was easy to be around in many ways. He didn't sweat the small stuff. He didn't complain about who took out the garbage. Because I think he had lived with such intensity.
Such stress.
Yeah. He really was at his best with children. Children followed him like a Pied Piper. He was shy. He was lonely a lot. We had I really tried to carve out this like normal life because so much of it had not been normal. We couldn't even, in the earlier days, we couldn't be alone. You know, he always had to have bodyguards. So one of the things that he did, I remember early on, I had an apartment and we would sneak away. He'd eluded the bodyguards that night. And we went across the street on Telegraph and Alcatraz. There was a black-owned, they used to call it filling station, gas station. And Huey wanted to, back then you got your windows washed and stuff. He wanted to feel like what it felt like to be just an ordinary guy. So he started washing the people's windows when they pull in, and he pumped their gas until they figure out who he was. And,
I can just imagine the faces.
Yes. So he really longed to have this life where he wasn't recognized. And so we try and carve that out. We do corny things like get family photos at Sears, go fly a kite. He'd spent a lot of time with my son. I had a son when we got married, and he was I remember Huey had this 66 Comet. My son still has it. and my son was about 10. And I was at this yard sale. And I remember looking down in this little box, and I looked up, and I saw the Comet drive by, and it was my son driving it, and Huey in the passenger seat. My son's like 9. So he, and I have a niece who likes.
Could he see over the steering
No,
wheel?
it was like, I have a niece, and he just really loved children. She was going to her prom, and we took her out to get her new prom dress. Huey and I did. And she liked to tell this story about him saying, no, you should get these shoes. And he tried them on to show her. And, no, these high heels or something. Then somebody saw Huey in some high heels. So I don't know. He was funny. And he just...
There were silly moments, too.
Very silly. He would get names to words, lyrics wrong. Like, and he'd think it was funny, and it wasn't. He couldn't tell a joke.
The educator in you was like,
that's not
now
funny.
Now you know that's not the
That
word.
is not. Those are not the words. He said, with Proud Mary. He said, man, and nobody would tell him. He said, man, them primaries, they just keep on rolling them primaries. I said, Huey, what's a primary? It's a Proud Mary. So he just, nobody would tell him.
You think he did that to see if somebody would tell him?
Probably, and then brothers would just stand there, yeah, them primaries, brother. I said, why you don't tell this man it's not primaries?
I said, you gotta get somebody around who's gonna be honest with you.
Seriously. Ashford and Simpson, what? Solid as a rock.
Yeah.
He said, solid, they solid. He said, hey, I heard them solid as a rock people getting a divorce. I said, that's not funny, honey. It wasn't even the truth.
He had a dad joke for it.
Oh, God. Yeah, he was ridiculous.
So 6 years after his death, you decided to co-found a foundation in his name.
I did.
Yeah. The man who was lonely, the man who was really an introvert, the man who wanted a sense of normalcy. You put him on an even bigger stage.
I
did.
did.
Put a whole organization.
Organization.
Dedicated to him. No, I love it. I love it.
Yeah, I did.
Tell us a little bit about your motivation. Tell us about the foundation's work, what you're most proud of.
If I didn't do it, I felt nobody would. I felt Huey had been so maligned, and that there was nobody there to offer balance. And so, why not me? But it first started when Huey died. We had to move. We had to move from his home. They took his home. And so black folks shopping or luggage, sometimes a big black shopping bag. So much of it was there were papers and archives, and most of it was really well preserved and well organized, but it was in my basement. And so one day when I went down there and looked, and I saw what was there, and David Hilliard, who was also very close to my family, who was former chief of staff of the Black Panther Party, he also saw what was in the basement. So we knew that it needed to be preserved. So we started working with local organizations to raise a little bit of money to get it fumigated, to get it organized. And Stanford University was the university where it went to at that time. We pitched it to other universities, and Stanford was the one that offered it. And so we wanted to create an organization whose mission would be to promote and maintain the legacy of the Black Panther Party, because particularly at that time, there was nothing written about the Black Panther Party that didn't malign it. So for me, it was very personal with Huey, and then broader. And you talk about the imposter syndrome. Here I was, somebody who'd been in the party for less than 2 years, and I'm maintaining the legacy of the party. So I was left with this legacy of the Black Panther Party.
That's a responsibility. You talk about the responsibility on his shoulders, the responsibility on yours to carry it and to anchor it and to give a counter narrative that is a more proper narrative, you know?
It has not been easy, but as a result, we've been able to create a whole museum and an archive. The archive is at Stanford University, the Dr. Huey P. Newton papers, or the Black Panther Party papers, which is the largest archive and the most researched archive at Stanford University.
Wow.
And what we're doing now is scanning it to make it, it's very cumbersome to research on the archive at Stanford, but what we're doing, we just recently received a grant to scan it so that it will be available at the museum. The newspapers, which were in publication for 13 years, I'm making sure that those newspapers are available for free in cities where the party was most prominent, in libraries and schools. So that's been the value now of protecting this intellectual property, or it would have gotten away. We could have had a MAGA hat with a panther on it. And when I was telling people that, they didn't believe it.
Yeah.
So yeah.
But the preservation, you know, the preservation of history, of story, of narrative, of being true to that history, you know, so that it's not co-opted, you know. You asked a question a moment ago. You said, who is she? I want you to take a look at this photo that's going to come on the screen. This was the bust that was dedicated to your husband a few years back.
Yes.
That woman on the screen is you, dedicating your husband's bust. Take us back to that moment. What were you feeling in that moment?
I felt like it was my wedding day. The day had the biggest storm that we've ever experienced in Oakland's history.
Wow.
And there were people dancing in the streets. We had expected, we had 25 vendors, all their tents blew up in the sky, and but there were still hundreds of people that came and they were dancing in the street. Fantastic Negrito just played under an umbrella. It was like the most spiritual moment I've experienced, really. It was beautiful.
Joyful. It sounds joyful.
It was very joyful. The people that were there really talk about what a spiritual moment it was to unveil. It's the first permanent art structure to commemorate the legacy of the Black Panther Party in Oakland, the city where it was formed. And it sits on that bronze box, and in there are love letters.
So beautiful. Thank you so much. My last question is, you, like other high-profile widows, like Coretta Scott King, Dr. Shabazz, who you mentioned, even Vanessa Bryant, so much of your life now is about preserving your husband's name and reputation, his work, his legacy. And I wonder about you, Fredrika. When you look internally, what do you want your legacy to be?
I think it's taken me so long to know that I did have a voice. I would like for other women not to wait so long. I'd like other women to realize that they have a voice at a much younger age. And if they don't, then I want them to know it's never too late.
It's never too late.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah. We read a piece last week at our staff retreat by Audre Lorde, where she talked about silence, of what had I ever been afraid? And that's what sparks in my spirit when I hear you say it's never too late to have your voice. Of what are you ever afraid? Thank you so much. Thank you for giving us your voice tonight.
Thank you.